On average, $47,000 worth of equity is left behind per job change, according to a recent study. The responsibility solely falls on you, so let me show you exactly what happens to your equity, how to strategize your exit, and how to potentially walk out with more equity than what you started with. Regardless of your unique employment status, cleaning out your desk should be the least of your worries. We need to go to the source of truth, which is your equity documents. This is the contract that you signed a long time ago, and perhaps you haven't looked at it since. This contract is the equity plan documents. The plan documents are kind of like the center of the solar system, and everything else evolves around it. If there is a change in your employment, the first place you want to start is by looking in these documents. If you don't have these documents, you either misplaced them or lost them, ask your company's stock plan administrator or hop onto your online stock plan portal and get the documents there. It's a physical contract, so it's the only reliable and binding source describing your equity upon job change. Please do not rely on what your coworkers say. These documents typically consist of two different pieces. There's the overarching plan, which is also known as the equity incentive plan, or the stock plan. And this is applicable to all shareholders. And the other document is going to be the grant agreement. The combination of these two documents should have enough information for you to make a decision and a plan surrounding your equity when leaving the company. You'll want to look for a few things in these documents. One is going to be the terms of the agreement. How many options do you have, or what type of option is it? Is it even an option? Is it restricted stock? And then you'll also want to see what the vesting is around the type of equity that you've been granted. Regardless of the type of equity that you've been granted, there are a few consistencies that happen when your employment comes to an end. First, starting from the date of your termination, not necessarily the day that you give your 2 weeks notice or that you notify the employer of your termination, any unvested equity will probably stop vesting and most likely be forfeited. There may be some one-off exceptions such as death or disability where vesting will continue or maybe even be accelerated. The vesting will largely depend on your company's equity documents. If you have double trigger RSUs at a private company, you could probably kiss those RSUs goodbye, but more on that in a minute. For owners of stock options, on the date of termination, a timer is going to start that will limit your ability to exercise. This is known as the post-termination exercise period, or PTEP. This is specific to options and sets the standard of how much time you have to exercise before you completely lose your options. You need to have this date understood as soon as possible, ideally long before your termination happens. Companies and courts are strict with these deadlines, even if you miss it just by a day or if there's an honest mistake made. There's no grace here as they follow the post-termination exercise period, or PTEP, to a T. For example, if you are exercising electronically, just know that it takes time for money to transfer in between two banks. And most equity documents don't consider the equity exercised until cash is received. I know people who have exercised their stock options before a deadline, but because the cash wasn't received before the deadline, they didn't make it in time. So what is the actual post-termination exercise period, or PTEP, deadline? Well, again, starting from the date of your termination, not the day that you give your 2 weeks notice, you'll have at least 90 days to exercise in most cases. This will also likely depend on the reason for your termination as well. The different types of termination could be for cause, like if you're fired. It could be without cause, like if there's a layoff or a furlough. It could be death or disability or even retirement. About 80% of companies have a post-termination exercise period of 90 days if you are leaving without cause. So even if you're just switching companies, that's considered without cause. You'll have 90 days to exercise. The 90-day period isn't something that's instituted by your company, but rather it's actually regulated by the IRS. These 90 days actually act as a minimum amount of time you have to exercise your options. So could it be longer? Yes. The 90-day window can often put employees into a very tight and expensive conundrum where they need to gather funds in order to exercise before they completely lose the contractual right to purchase those shares. So companies may actually extend this PTEP much longer than 90 days in the case where there's large layoffs, just as a form of goodwill to the employees. But it doesn't require large layoffs or other unique circumstances for companies to large these extended PTEP windows. Companies like Pinterest and Quora and Square, they have extended post-termination exercise periods to attract the best talent. I personally like what Carta does with their PTEP, which is allowing the PTEP to be as long as their employment was. So if they worked at Carta for 3 years, then they have a 3-year post-termination exercise period. Well done, Carta. Well done. When companies choose to extend the post-termination exercise period, or PTEP, there may be an adverse tax consequence. While options are given 90 days to exercise by the IRS, incentive stock options have 3 months to retain their incentive stock option status before they become NSOs, except in death or disability. There's a tiny nuance here. There is a difference between 90 days and 3 months. 3 months can be as large or as many as 92 days or as little as 89 days, depending on where the 3 months falls in the calendar year. I know it's picky, but someone out there will thank me for saving them money. Speaking of picky, if you've been furloughed, you'll want to clarify with the company if you're being terminated or if it's just a temporary leave of absence. Depending on the contract, some companies will give vesting credit to maternity leave, military service, sickness, sabbatical, while others just don't do that. If you have any questions, you can ask your HR director, CFO, or stock plan administrator. If your termination is from disability or death, then you will usually have 12 months to exercise. I mean, your executor family will have 12 months to exercise. Dead people don't exercise stock options. If you don't exercise before your stock options expire, then all of your hard work or vested options will be forfeited to the company's option pool to be re-granted to other employees. Carta did some research on how many vested options are forfeited each year. And after reviewing 386 companies valued at over $1 billion or more, they found that $1.8 billion of in-the-money vested equity was left behind annually. On a per employee basis, this equated to $47,000 based on 409A values. In my estimation, I'd guess that $47,000 would actually be much higher if they used the preferred share prices. But missing out on $47,000 isn't the worst thing that could happen. I'll show you how it can actually get a lot uglier than $47,000 when we talk about strategies. But first, a quick recap of RSUs. Typically, non-vested RSUs or restricted stock are forfeited, again with some exceptions for disability, retirement, or some sort of acquisition. If the shares vested before the termination date, then the shares will continue under your ownership. If you own restricted stock, sometimes private companies have what's called repurchasing rights to previously purchased restricted stock. I mostly see repurchase agreements with the company being able to buy back the stock at the lower of two prices, the price you paid for it or the fair market value. Here's a quick note on qualified ESPPs or Section 423 plans before talking about strategies. If you're participating in your company's employee stock purchase plan, then any contributions that have yet to purchase company stock will be withdrawn. No company stock will be purchased with those funds and they'll return back to you. But there is an instance where the IRS will actually let you purchase company stock through the ESPP despite having been terminated from the company. If the purchase date happens within 3 months of the termination date, then your funds can actually remain in the ESPP to buy company stock, hopefully at a discount. As you plan your departure from your current company or deal with the sudden loss of employment, you'll want to keep access to your online stock plan portal. Most of the time, you'll have your own login credentials like at Carta or at E-Trade or wherever your equity is being held. But these portals hold your ability to exercise electronically and look at key data such as the type of equity that you have and run some scenarios on exercise costs. One piece of key information that you'll definitely want to check is when your options actually expire, which is typically going to be 10 years from the date after grant. I know this is super nitpicky, but technically speaking, if your options expire before the 90-day post-termination exercise period, then you don't have 90 days to exercise, you have until your options expire. I know this will save at least one person out there. Another piece of key information that you'll want to look at is your vesting schedule. So how much equity is vesting and when? You might consider delaying your exit until after some big vesting event. Of course, it doesn't make sense for you to continue to work there and try to get more and more vesting if the reason you're leaving is because of some toxic and strenuous work environment. You'll want to trust your gut on this one to see how much you're willing to prioritize the financial benefit over your physical, emotional, spiritual, and even mental health. It's super easy. Please just double check your grant to make sure that you're not leaving one day before a big vest. For the smoothest transition, you'll also want to keep the contact information of the HR director, perhaps the CFO, or maybe even the stock plan administrator, as you may need their help in the future. For example, after your employment terminates, you may be on a tight tax deadline where you need the W-2 from the previous employer to report a NSO exercise. Having their contact information allows you to execute your plan without any delay. Okay, so now let's talk about the actual strategies. If you only have 90 days to exercise, you may consider working until sometime mid-October so that that 90-day window spreads across 2 separate tax years. Having the ability to exercise across 2 separate tax years gives you the flexibility to perhaps reduce, minimize, or even completely remove your tax bill. It may even buy you more time before your next tax bill comes due so that you can have some more time to gather funds necessary to pay the tax bill. Please be aware of quarterly estimated taxes so that you're not under withholding throughout the tax year. You could even be as nitpicky as leaving after October 15th so that if you're wanting to exercise in early January, you're not beholden to the January 15th quarterly estimated tax withholding deadline. This will absolutely require the help of a tax planning professional. Also remember that the information provided in this video is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized tax, legal, or investment advice. As such, please work with your professional. When you leave, withholdings are still applicable to RSUs and NSO exercises. ISOs, on the other hand, don't have withholdings in the first place, so that doesn't change. Whatever the company withholds goes towards taxes and doesn't get refunded to you upon termination. The withholdings should continue as normal and be reported on your W-2. Sometimes, however, the withholding doesn't actually happen with the employer and it falls between the cracks. Just know that if that's the case and the company doesn't withhold, you are now on the hook for making sure that you are withholding enough through quarterly estimated taxes. When I was originally writing this script, I was going to say that the $47,000 or whatever your amount is being left behind is the worst thing that could happen to you, but that's far from the truth here. If you do choose to exercise, you'll have financial and tax ramifications that could easily cause financial ruin. I don't say this as a platitude, but from seeing people go through this firsthand. You'll really need to nail down the financial and tax risks at hand so that you don't bankrupt your financial future. But what if you can't afford to exercise? If you've got another job opportunity lined up, you could consider negotiating a sign-on bonus to help cover the financial and tax costs. There are third-party companies out there that offer non-recourse loans to help cover the exercise and tax costs. You repay this loan when your company has some sort of liquidity event. This comes with its own fees and its own risks associated with it, so please be aware of the negative outcomes such as a taxable loan from loan forgiveness. You can learn more in the card up above. The next option is a net exercise. This is where you trade in a portion of your shares as a form of compensation to cover the exercise costs. You ultimately walk away with fewer shares as some of them went towards the exercise costs, but it allowed you to actually walk away with shares rather than having to forfeit them. If you're finding this useful, please hit the like button. You also have the potential to sell on a secondary market. You'll want to check with your company to see if this is even a possibility, and just be aware of repurchase agreements or clawback provisions. Another way to fund the exercise cost is if you have some sort of severance. If you haven't received a severance package, it still may be a possibility for you to negotiate that, and if so, that could help cover some of the exercise costs. Lastly, another possibility is the PTEP, or the post-termination exercise period, getting that extended. Now, this will actually require some credibility and some clout and some influence in the company for the company to actually make this exception. This goes without saying, but please be a good employee. Please don't do anything that would cause you to get fired for a cause, as in that case, the company could completely withdraw your equity and leave you with nothing left. This will also affect your ability to negotiate equity on your way out. If you leave, it's likely you're going to leave with nothing, especially if you have RSUs. But at least something is better than nothing. If people are leaving $47,000 worth of equity on the table during the job change, how can we actually flip this circumstance so that you're leaving the company with more equity than what you started with? You've probably heard the saying that you only get what you ask for, but this first one doesn't actually require you to ask for it. You may be obligated to it. Take a look at the company's stock plan language. The definition section will define terms like termination education, employment, and service to company. See if there's any wiggle room for interpretation here. Upon further reading, you may find that the term service would allow you to continue to work as a consultant, an independent contractor, or even a part-time employee. Because the 90-day PTEP is dependent upon your service, you may be able to actually keep your equity and continue to let it vest. Please ensure that you are actually providing services to the company. If you're doing this solely to keep your options or RSUs, then this could be considered fraud. If you do become some sort of non-employee director, the reporting of your equity will change. For example, NSO exercises are typically reported on your W-2 with your company withholding taxes. But if you become a contractor, expect to see this come through on the 1099 NEC without any withholdings. Here's another reminder to check if quarterly estimated taxes are applicable. Eventually, you could find yourself in a position where you'll want to ask for something, such as accelerated vesting. What's the worst that they could tell you? No? I recently worked with an executive who got $3 million by simply asking for accelerated vesting, even though the original contract didn't have 100% acceleration in it. Ideally, this is something that you negotiate when you first start your employment, not as you're leaving. But even if you're leaving, your company has the ability to extend the post-termination exercise window, accelerate vesting, or even continue vesting. It's rare that they'll actually do this because there's often adverse tax and accounting consequences. But if you have enough influence at the company, they may do this for you after weighing the cost. Especially if there is severance, try and negotiate accelerated vesting or an extended post-termination exercise period. Even if they say no, you now have an idea of how to negotiate your next offer. When negotiating your next offer, you can get more pay, better terms, and more flexibility by implementing the things I teach right here.